Too hot for TV.
Welcome back to Doctor Who Too Hot for TV. We are the podcast that looks at all things Doctor Who Extended Universe. This time, for the second time this season, I'm joined by JR Southall. JR, how are you?
Oh, I get to go twice in a season.
You do.
I feel like Tim Shaw.
You look like Tim Shaw.
Thanks very much. I used to look like Tim Shaw when I was 17.
Did you really? A lot of acne, was it?
Actually, I didn't have acne that bad, to be fair.
Do you know what? While we're on this subject, I want to delve into something that another podcast failed to delve into. You mentioned on the Time Lash, or in the Time Lash, that you used to be a goth. Tell us more about your goth phase.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. The first band I ever saw was the Sisters of Mercy. I used to be into things like The Cure and stuff like that. This was before goth went emo.
Right.
So at this point, goth was just kind of... And I never had the spiky hair or anything, but I did used to dress all in black and smoke round the back of the bike sheds. I mean, this was what goths were. It wasn't this big sort of arty movement. It was just a bunch of kids dressed all in black, smoking round the back of the bike sheds.
Excellent. So you didn't have like the Robert Smith hair and lipstick?
No. I wore lipstick once and I thought, yeah, that was a mistake. No, not lipstick. Actually, it was eyeliner. I wore eyeliner once and I thought afterwards, no, I shan't do that again.
Excellent.
Also, I came from a small town, so if you dressed all in black, let alone wear eyeliner, you were going to get beaten up.
Fair. No, I get that. No, nobody seemed to like... Well, it was emo kids when I was a kid, but I don't know how the goths fared. I just always remember a story Robert Smith telling of when he first got into dressing in what became goth, and he was smoking upstairs on a bus, and he had like these plastic black trousers, and he flicked his cigarette on the floor, and it went in the turn-ups, and his trousers caught on fire.
Nice.
We digress. What are we here to talk about today, JR?
We're talking about the Auton trilogy, aren't we?
We are indeed.
You're going to tell me about the Auton trilogy, because I don't really know. It's because I'm not as well versed in any of this stuff as you are.
Wow.
So I came to all of these things years after the fact. In the wilderness years, I was, I don't know, in bands, making music, making love to sweet, beautiful girls, and all this kind of stuff. I kind of lost my way with Doctor Who and got back into it when the DVDs started coming out. Actually, I remember when it wasn't the Five Doctors one, it was the next one, the Robots of Death. When that came out, I remember I think it came out around about a Christmas time.
It did.
Yeah, and I said to some family member, I used to like Doctor Who, get me that for Christmas. And actually, it wasn't the story itself necessarily so much, although I really enjoyed rewatching the story. I mean, I'd seen it 15 times when I was like, when the VHS had come out. But rewatching the story, I was like, oh, wow, this is still great. But it was listening to the commentary, which everybody hates now.
Yeah.
Which is just Chris Boucher and Philip Hinchcliffe just chatting quietly about what's happening on the screen. It was watching that made me think, ooh, I could get back into this. And before you knew it, I was.
Well, it was the right point, wasn't it? Because that was the proper launch of the DVD range. So then after that, I think they did one every 2 or 3 months before going monthly. But
yeah.
That was in the days where things like interactive menus were still listed as an extra because it was very exciting.
And there wasn't an awful lot on some of those early discs, but there was enough just to sort of pique your interest. There was always a commentary.
Yeah.
And the commentary back in those days was like a real insight into this sort of world that up till then you'd only really experienced, or I'd only really experienced through the magazine. And reading people's words is a very different experience to listening to them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think the people doing the commentaries knew what they were doing at the time. So I'm not saying you get like revelations or anything like that on those early commentaries or like Scandal, but as you say, it's more conversational. They're not being interviewed. And they realise at some point that perhaps people from the 60s need a bit of a help on, and Tom Baker needs help not repeating the same stories again and again. But
I think that spoils it, though, because, yes, it stops them repeating the same stories over and over again. But then this is the record of those stories, isn't it, for all time? So this is where you want to hear those stories. But those first sort of couple of years of commentaries, the people doing them would just sort of wander off and start talking about this, that, and the other, anything that sort of the conversation wandered onto. And then you start getting moderators saying, oh, no, mustn't talk about that. Must get back to Doctor Who. And I'm like, please, just let them chat.
Yeah. No, I get you. I think the last ones without a moderator, I want to say, are those Key to Time ones with Tom Baker and Mary Tam, who are clearly enjoying a glass of champagne or two while they do it.
Yeah, why not?
And they were brilliant, but you know, I think they thought, oh, we need to rein this in somehow. But
I stopped listening to the commentaries. I mean, not altogether, but and it wasn't because of the moderators necessarily, but after the moderators sort of come on board and they start sort of making the conversation be about exactly what's going on the screen all the time, I'm like, oh no, this is it can be really dull just saying, oh, look at me in this dress, look at that bush in the corner of the set there, and all this kind of stuff. I'm not interested in the bush in the corner of the set. I want to know what Tom Baker was doing on his lunch break.
Well, he was getting drunk, probably.
Well, exactly.
So, Auton, the first Auton film, directed by Nick Briggs, written by Nick Briggs, produced by Bill Baggs, released by BBV in January of 1997. News at the time, Universal Television, the US co-production partner on last year's Doctor Who TV movie, has negotiated an extension to its option on further Doctor Who films and episodes with BBC Worldwide, which I thought was quite interesting because you kind of think that the TV movie just stops dead. But clearly they thought there was more in it and were trying to do something for at least a year afterwards.
And then, of course, the fact that they had an extension meant that it was 2005 before we got Russell T Davies, when we could have had it a few years earlier.
Quite possibly. And then in March, Tele Global Marketing Limited were launching a BBC-licensed Doctor Who interactive telephone line. The service, structured around a tour of Unit HQ, will include notice boards where fans can leave messages for one another, a role-playing game, news bulletins, interviews, competitions, and special offers.
It's almost as if they didn't realise the internet was just around the corner.
But I do remember, I don't remember that. I'm not sure whether it ever launched or not. But I do remember things like being in buying a CD single or something like that, and it's saying ring this number for an exclusive listen to the next single, and you get
really
call up a premium rate phone number that my parents went nuts at before, hearing 30 seconds of a band's next single. So, I mean, I guess those things were fun.
Yeah, I don't remember any of that, to be honest.
And then other releases at the time, we had Perceptions, which was an 8th Doctor, Stacey and Sard comic strip published in the Radio Times. We had The New Adventure Eternity Weeks featuring the 7th Doctor, Chris, Liz, Benny and Jason. The Missing Adventure Burning Heart with the 6th Doctor and Perry. The Nth Doctor, and the comic strip in DWM was The Keep featuring the 8th Doctor and Izzy. Remember any of those?
No.
You mean you weren't a big fan of the 8th Doctor Radio Times comic?
I mean, you're also talking about sort of Christmas 2000 or 90. Yeah, it was Christmas 2000, wasn't it? Robots of Death. So this was all before So it's not that I wasn't aware of things like this happening, but no, I wasn't keeping an eye on any of this stuff, really.
Sad, sad times, JR. Fandom without JR scarcely bears thinking about.
Okay, now move on.
Too hot for TV.
At a top-secret unit facility known as the Warehouse, Dr. Sally Arnold has been studying a Nestine energy unit with no results. As a last resort, she subjects the artifact to cosmic signals from unit's most powerful deep space scanning satellite. This causes a violent energy release that kills her assistant Janice. When the energy unit disappears, a containment team, led by a psychic unit operative named Lockwood, has been dispatched. Among Lockwood's abilities is the ability to access all information from any computer mainframe in the world with his mind. They soon learn that the Nestine energy unit has taken on a mobile form and that there is an Auton copy of senior archivist Graham Winslet. The real Winslet is still alive, his mind being used by the Autons as a resource of information. The energy unit then merges with Auton Winslet. Several dormant Autons in the Warehouse come back to life, and the building becomes a battlefield. They are eventually defeated with the weapon created by the Doctor and Liz Shaw in Spearhead from Space. The Auton Winslet then liquefies and escapes through a ventilation shaft. All of the synopses on this episode come from the Wikipedia article.
Too hot for TV.
So when did you first see, not just Auton 1, but the whole trilogy?
It wasn't a massive time after. So I've got them all on DVD, and I dug out the DVDs for this. I'm trying to remember now if the first time I saw them was when they were released on DVD, or whether I had them on VHS first. Because because the Autons have always been kind of my favourite Doctor Who monster, I guess, which goes back to reading the Auton Invasion and Terror of the Autons in the Targets when I was a child. Those two weren't necessarily my absolute favourites amongst the books, but because there were two of them, and because they were in quite close succession on the telly, so they kind of formed almost like a double-length book, really. You could read the pair of them together, one after another. I would go back to those two over and over. So the Autons were always something that I just would, it was just a well that I would go back to over and over and over again. So when I realised there were these 3 Auton films, I think I got them fairly early. In fact, it might be that a friend loaned me his copies of the VHSs, and then I bought them on DVD when the DVDs came out. So I think probably in the mid sort of 2000s, maybe around the time the TV programme came back. In fact, I want to say, I'm going to tell this story, even though I'm completely making it up, and you can edit this so it makes it sound like it's a true story. I was so pissed off at the underuse of the Autons in Rose that I went out and got copies of these 3.
Brilliant. Well, quite
not true, obviously.
Quite sort of infamously, it was either Phil Collinson or Jane Tranter who had to ring up Bill Baggs to find out who owned the Autons when they were planning Rose.
Oh, really?
They weren't sure whether he purchased the rights sort of in perpetuity, and he was like, oh, surprisingly for Bill Baggs, you'd think he'd go, yeah, I own them, I'm going to need £5,000 please. He just went, no, I've just got the license to do 3 films. But yeah.
Wow. While we're on the subject of the license, because we probably won't come back to this, but the thing is, when you license the characters, you're licensing from the author of the scripts. Yeah. And so you're all licensing what's on the printed page. You are not licensing the designer's work. You're not licensing anything like that. And so that Nestine, the little ball thing, what's it called? The Nestine energy unit.
Yeah.
You're not licensing the design for that. You can't use that in your films. You're not licensing what the Autons look like in Spearhead from Space. You can't use those masks in your films. That's not part of the license. You've licensed the characters, but you've not licensed the designs. And so actually, all 3 of these films are completely illegal, as are most of, but nobody at the BBC cared, so they didn't stop them.
Nobody cared. We've just done Shakedown recently on this, and the reason they redesigned the Sontarans, change their colour, give them slightly different looking heads, give them the knobbly bits, is because they couldn't use the traditional design. But you're right, nobody cared enough to warrant checking. And obviously they were licensed from Robert Holmes's widow. Now, I believe all the rights to those, not all, but certainly a lot of the 60s and 70s writers, the rights now reside either with the BBC, who bought them out, or with a company called The Agency, and the agency will negotiate only if you've got a license from the BBC. So Big Finish can negotiate with them.
Right.
DWM can, but if Bill Baggs decided to make another Auton film, he couldn't do it without getting permission from the BBC.
Sure. And to me, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to decry what these guys were doing during the wilderness years, making their own films, but I mean, to coin a phrase, they've taken a bit of a license, aren't they?
Very true. Very true. So you said you're a fan of the Autons. Do you think they are a credible enough presence within Doctor Who to be the main pull for 3 videos/films?
Yes and no. The thing about the Autons is, it's not the Autons, although that in the first, well, in fact, in both of the sort of Auton stories in the 70s, they do have quite an iconic design, don't they?
Yeah.
So actually, they do look great. But it's not that so much as the idea. I mean, Robert Holmes, we all know he's a genius writer anyway, and I think this is an absolute purple period for him during the John Pertwee, because it's Robert Holmes just kind of letting himself go. And his imagination is on fire. And it's the idea of the plastic coming to life. So the thing I liked about the Auton stories wasn't the Autons themselves so much as they felt like conspiracy theory stories in Doctor Who. So it wasn't so much, so the people at this place might be involved, the people at this place might be innocent, these people might be involved in this conspiracy. So it's all about the Nestine consciousness. It's taken over the minds of certain people and replicating certain people. And those were the things I found most interesting, I think. Who was involved, who wasn't involved. It's a very Malcolm Hulk thing as well, of course, isn't it?
Yeah.
To do it. It's that whole period. I was just going to say, it's that whole period where Watergate became a thing. But already, before even Watergate, there was something in the air. And there's lots of conspiracy thriller films coming from the States and stuff. And I don't know, I've just always really enjoyed that stuff where you don't know who your friend is and you don't know who your enemy is. And so the Auton stories are the perfect juncture between that kind of who's your friend, who's your enemy, and also there's these really interesting, iconic-looking Doctor Who monsters going around gunning people down in the countryside.
I think the trilogy as a whole sort of builds on the conspiracy nature in terms of internally in unit, but it's less so in this first one. I also think the first one is very much an Auton film where it becomes about the Nestines later on, and I think quite rightly so. There's only so much you can do with the henchmen. So what do we think of Nick Briggs's script and his use of the Autons in this first film?
Objectively, it's not very imaginative, but subjectively, I think he probably does a really good job. So there's 2 ways of looking at it, aren't there? That film, all 3 of these films, frankly, you probably couldn't put on the telly. They're not broadcastable. They're not up to enough scratch for that. Even then, they weren't.
Well, they were broadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel.
That's
the sort of level of the Sci-Fi Channel original productions and stuff at the time were not broadcastable on BBC One, for instance.
No. Well, exactly. That's what I mean. Not broadcastable on terrestrial telly. But considering what they're doing, which is basically a scripted home movie with a little bit of budget, basically they do a really good job. It's hard to talk about the first one without talking about the other 2 as well, because...
Feel free to jump around.
Well, obviously all 3 of them are made by people who are fans of the period and who are trying to replicate the period. And so we'll talk about what the second one does and what the third one does later. But what the first one does is it says what was going on in season 7. And this is a funny thing, isn't it? Because season 7 is all about underground facilities and factories and warehouses and stuff, except for one story, that being basically the Auton story. I mean, there's factories in it, but it's the one that's least set in factories and underground facilities. But with the first of the sort of Auton trilogy, they go, right, what's that period famous for? Underground facilities. And so they set it underground in an underground facility. And actually, it's only this time that I've watched it. I think this is only the second time I've watched these 3. Possibly the third. I think it's only the second. It wasn't until right at the very end of this one that I actually noticed, the second time I'm watching it, that it's set underground rather than a factory above ground.
Right.
There's a line of dialogue at the end, doesn't it? We better get back up to the surface. And I think the first time I watched it, I just didn't even notice. And this time I'm like, what?
You never see them go down you
No.
see them come in through the inside door and there's boxes, but there's never any sense of like sort of going down.
No.
But I mean, I guess that's probably a lot to do with the space they were working in. But
They could have just had a bit with some stairs or something that looked like a lift or something. Because I think one of the big problems with this is the whole story, about 50 minutes of it, is a bunch of people in an enclosed space who are trapped. And yet, for the entire running time, I'm thinking, well, there's got to be at least 3 doors on this building. How trapped are you?
Yeah.
So I never got the sense that they were properly trapped.
There is a fantastic moment where they find a secret door, and it's barricaded off by all these boxes. And the 2 actors do a really good job of heavy lifting the first box down. It's really heavy. They put it to the floor. Then all the other boxes are light. And then they turn around and one of them picks up the very first box that was clearly very heavy before and moves it very lightly. But that was just a moment that stuck out for me. I think Briggs's script I think it works. And I think he's good at building the atmosphere in it and he uses his time wisely. But then when we get to the resolution, it's very much just, oh, well, here's that thing from Spearhead from Space that killed the Autons. We found it, we've got it working, and now we can kill the Autons again.
To be fair, that thing is in the story from about the halfway mark onwards, and they keep talking about it and referring to it and going back to it to try and fix it. But yeah, it is. It's just very much, this is what I meant about it kind of lacks for imagination, because it really is just repeating lots of things that were in Doctor Who. From the sort of underground facility to the thing that sort of, finishes the story, resolves the story, to the Nestine energy units. Everything about it is just a repeat of something we've seen. And I don't think, to be fair, there's anything in the dialogue, because it's quite functional, isn't it, as a story? It just wants to replicate what people have seen before. It's a bit like, and I suppose this is a philosophical point about Big Finish. And this is not a criticism, but this is just a sort of philosophical observation about what Big Finish do. Doctor Who on the television is for new viewers and wants to push the series on. Doctor Who on audio with Big Finish is essentially for people who've liked Doctor Who in the past, and so it's there to replicate the things that they've liked in the past. And so Big Finish, in my experience, which is relatively limited, but I've heard a few Big Finish and I've seen a bunch of these things. They are primarily aimed at people who've enjoyed Doctor Who in the past, and it's just a way of giving them something that's new that they've not seen before, but that is absolutely bound by all the rules and all the sort of things that the old series did. And so I don't think Auton's manifesto is to do anything new with the Autons, but just to give people that third Auton story that they never got in the 1970s. And so it just repeats in a way that actually Robert Holmes didn't with Terror of the Autons. He really pushed things on, because in the first Auton story, Spearhead from Space, you don't get all the animated plastic stuff. You get the replicated humans. You get the sort of mind control on the humans, but you don't get the animated plastic. And then in the second one, Robert Holmes goes, oh, animated plastic, here's a telephone line, here's a daffodil, and so on and so forth. This one doesn't push things on in the way that Robert Holmes would have if he'd have done a third Auton story. It basically just gives you Spearhead from Space again, but without the stuff on the high street, really.
Yeah.
But having said that, the converse of that is, if you enjoyed Spearhead from Space, there's no real reason why you won't enjoy this.
Yeah. And what do you think? Briggs not only writes it, but he directs it as well. And we're very used to Nick Briggs directing audios, but he hasn't done a lot of visual stuff. How do you think he handles the direction?
I think he's better on the second one than the first one when he gets outdoors. So I actually think he's not bad. And I'm surprised he doesn't do more of it, because I think he's fairly functional as a writer, as a director, I think he has a bit more grasp of the sort of visual. So I don't think he's necessarily brilliant with the actors, although I'm not complaining about the performances, but I don't think there's a huge amount of imagination going on in the performances. So I don't think he teases things out of the actors necessarily. But what he does do is he decides on. So a lot of the performances, and this comes under the direction too, because it's about a choice that the director makes with the actor. I think the actors are all characteristics rather than character.
Okay.
And so you get them doing certain things repeatedly over and over, but they don't really develop. And you don't really get a sense of a deeper person. You just get the surface characteristics. But beyond that, the actual visuals, given the limitations on what he does here, so they've clearly just got basically 2 rooms that they sort of redress over and over again to try and give you a sense of the warehouse or the underground facility. Given all that, I think he does a relatively good job here. I think he gets much better when he goes out of doors.
I think this is one of the better directed of these sort of spin-off videos, of which there's about 20.
Yeah.
And I think he shows a lot of promise. Like he thinks about how he's composing his shots, even with the limited resources. He uses great tracking shots. There's high-angled shots. There's even when he jumps to there's jib shots when he jumps to handheld at certain points to sort of show the frantic nature of a battle. He's thinking about it. We get a shot inside the crate that the Auton's in before it breaks out. It's like he's really thought about how he wants this to look and composed every shot in a way that I think perhaps Bill Baggs certainly doesn't on his later output.
Right, yeah.
First, but I think he's a better director than Bill Baggs is.
I would definitely say so on the basis of these 3 stories. And actually, we watched 42 for Strangers in Space the other day, and some of the action stuff there was filled with sort of like cutaway shots to people that look like something out of a Laurel and Hardy movie. And it sort of completely destroyed some of the tension, although it was a much better story. But you don't get any of that here. So given the limitations, the action and stuff, he does a really good job with it.
I suppose we talked about this a little bit, but let's jump a little bit further into it. What do you think of the general production values? Does this look cheap, even by its sort of contemporary standards?
I think it does. I think that's the problem with it. I think the issue is somebody said, right, we've got these couple of rooms in a warehouse that we can use, and we're going to try and make it look like an underground facility. What are we going to put in there? And somebody says, boxes. And that's about it, isn't it? Nobody's got the foresight to think about it any further than that. And so it really obviously becomes really clear really quickly that all they've got to work with is sort of boxes. Boxes and like those big sort of tube things. And they dress all the boxes the same, basically, with the same sort of fragile sticker on it. So in the end, it looks like a set that somebody's dressed with not a lot of money. Whereas if they'd have had a little bit more imagination about it, they could perhaps have disguised the sort of cheapness of it a little bit better. And the rooms that they've got to work with aren't big enough either.
Yeah.
So there's never a sense of space in that building.
They're going for the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it just doesn't quite work and just looks like a stock room in like a JJB Sports or something like that.
Absolutely. And even then, it just doesn't look like it stretches far enough. They're clearly doing it actually in an actual warehouse or something that they've been able to nab a couple of rooms for.
I think it's actually a studio. I think it's like a studio at a university, but even if you've got a studio, you're still like...
Yeah.
So they're sort of building walls and stuff out of boxes and then say they've got 2 studio rooms next to each other, but I think they're very basic studios. But what it does mean is they can light from the ceiling, which you sort of see on the extra features. But yeah, it's a blank canvas space that they're doing their best they can with when they've got no money.
Yeah. I mean, it's fair enough, but it's one of those things where you just think, if only they'd have thought to do that. You're looking at it and you're looking at the boxes and you're thinking, well, if just a thought to put some different types of boxes or something else here against this wall, or maybe move the camera to a slightly different angle to try and give the room a bit more space and depth. But it just, the filming inside the facility leaves a lot to be desired, really. Not necessarily the direction, going back to talking about Nicholas Briggs, but just what the limitations of what they had to work with. Somebody with just that little bit more imagination might have been able to make it feel just that little bit more expansive.
So the original brief was to do a low-budget drama that involved the Autons and featured the Brigadier, Kate Stewart, as played by Beverly Cressman, and Cavendish, the character played by Miles Richardson in Downtime. Now, the script was written, and 2 weeks beforehand, Nick Courtney drops out. So they're about to shoot. Nick Courtney drops out, and it's like, what do we do? Do we continue and just try and make the best of it, or do we wait until Nick is well enough, because he wasn't very well at the time, well enough to do it? And they decide to go ahead anyway, but as a result of that, they rewrite, and they can't figure a way to get Kate and Cavendish in without the Brigadier, so they create this new set of characters, essentially, the lead being Lockwood, played by Michael Wade, and Dr. Sally Arnold, played by Bryony Pritchard. So what do we think of our two, let's call them Brigadier or even Doctor replacements?
Well, this is it. Is Lockwood the character that the Brigadier would have been?
So what Nick Briggs said was that he sort of, rather than just change the name, he rethought about what the characters were, even though he didn't have a huge amount of time. So it's sort of, he said what he did was sort of take the idea of the Brigadier and the idea of the Doctor, smash them together, and then split them out into Lockwood and Sally Arnold. So the Brigadier side of it obviously doesn't play in as much as you would want it to.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it really does at all. Lockwood seems like somebody said, we need an avatar for the Doctor in this. What's the Doctor famous for? The Doctor's famous for being an alien. So, okay, this is going to be a human being, but let's give him some characteristics that mark him out as different from the other human beings. And so you've got this weird psychic thing going on. I mean, it's not explained. It's not explained until the third one. What's going on, is it? I don't remember an explanation before
He's just got some sort of, they call him Unit's creature or something like that, and some sort of connection to the Nestines or psychic abilities.
But they don't explain that he's got a chip in his head until the third one, do they?
Yeah, exactly.
So he's got this weird thing going on. I thought the problem was, so with somebody like the Doctor, you get what the Doctor fronts as. And with somebody like the Brigadier or whatever, you give what they front as. They're the way they present themselves. But on sort of like professional television, let's say, where you've got a team of script editors and producers and the directors giving input and the actors perhaps are giving input too, the more professional you do it, the more money you put into it, the more people bother to spend the time, and the more people get prodded into finding the character. And so the presentation of a character is only the surface thing. And with something like, well, Indiana Jones, say we mentioned just now, Indiana Jones presents as this guy who goes running around, grabbing things and sort of escaping from the bad guys. But you get the girlfriend, and you also get to see him at the university, and you get to see that at the university he's a very, very different person indeed. And then with Marion, he's a very, very different person indeed. And then later on with the kid, again, you get to see all these different facets of his personality. I think the problem here, especially with Lockwood, is you get to see what he presents as. And that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing beyond what he presents as. And so actually, I think he gives what could have been a very engaging, charismatic performance. But because it never varies, it starts to grind pretty quickly.
Absolutely. As you say, it's just a presentation of that one element. And I think that's the same with all of them. We don't really get to know much about them. Like, it's very difficult to care about the woman that dies at the beginning because she is just, she is just cannon fodder. And we're meant to think there's this relationship between Sally Arnold and Janice, I think it is. But the only flashback they give us just before she dies, it's like, oh, actually, if we could establish some sort of long-term friendship relationship, does she have a family, all that stuff? It's just very much like she's dead because we need to kill somebody early on.
And it does that thing where it gives them a personality moment. So I can't remember what it was, but I remember logging at the time. Oh, they've given them a personality moment where you're supposed to twig that these two people have been friends for a long time. Not because they told you they'd been friends for a long time, but because they said something to each other that's the kind of thing that only friends for a long time would say. But because they did it in such a heavy-handed way, where it was, oh, here's the thing I'm going to say to you that only people who've known each other for a very long time would say to each other, it just didn't really come off at all.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that would have worked out much better if they'd have had a lot of rehearsal. If they'd have known each other, or maybe if they'd have had a lot of experience so they could just do it naturally. But they never made it feel natural.
But the whole thing is basically cast from people that Nick Briggs has been in rep with over the last few years. Apart from Dr. Daniel Matthews, or Dr. Dan, playing Reece Shearsmith. Let's turn up for the books, eh?
Wow. But I don't rate Reece Shearsmith as a natural actor.
Mm.
So I think he's very good at certain things. And obviously the League of Gentlemen and, the things he's done subsequent to that, of that ilk, he's very good at that kind of thing. But trying to do natural, he's a bit like Lockwood in that he just sort of comes off. So he's the opposite of Lockwood, but essentially is the same as Lockwood in that he's just trying to give this sort of insouciant performance, but it just becomes this performed insouciance rather than a natural insouciance.
He is completely miscast. And I think at this point, the League of Gentlemen radio play or the Edinburgh play had happened, but I don't think, League of Gentlemen wasn't the hit television series it was going to become.
No.
And he'd been in the Probe films, which were written by his good pal Mark Gatiss. And so I think Bill, when casting this film, just went, "Oh, we'll get Reece because he's one of the group of actors that I know." And there's a very good reason he doesn't show up in the second one, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Is that not just because the League of Gentlemen had taken off?
That's exactly what it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I kind of assumed as much.
Yeah, that's it. And we also get introduced to our main villain, Graham Winslet, played by George Telfer. How do we feel about him?
I think he's a really good actor, miscast.
Oh, interesting.
So I think he gives. So I don't know what he's like elsewhere. I'm sure I've seen him in a couple of other things. He looked familiar. Maybe that's just me remembering from having seen this before. But he looks like the kind of person who could give a really good performance in another role. But I think he's given just slightly too much performance for this role, if you know what I mean. So I think a lot of the time what this really calls for is a sort of quiet stillness.
Yeah.
Where you let what's happening tell the story rather than trying to tell the story through what your face is doing. But I think actually I think all of the actors in all of these things basically give good performances. But basically, I think, well, as you say, they've been cast from the people that Nick Briggs knows rather than the people that a casting director would have chosen to put in those parts. So I think basically everybody feels slightly miscast because they're trying to squeeze actors that they know into roles that they weren't really made for.
Absolutely. They've all got ability, but it's, you're right. They're not quite playing to their strengths.
Yeah. And I do think he's really good. But like I say, I think he's doing too much. So when he's playing the Auton one, he should be really still. And yet it still feels too much like a person.
Is there much more you want to say about this first film before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, there's Andrew, I don't know how you pronounce it, Andrew Fettes as well.
Yes.
Again, he feels...
Ramsey.
Yeah. Again, he feels like he's a quite capable performer, but he's really not a soldier.
No. I could see him more in the Dr. Dan role, if he'd been playing Reece Shearsmith's.
Actually,
I think he'd be really good in that. But then Reece Shearsmith definitely isn't a soldier. So when you're casting around your group of actors, I suppose you're going with what is the best fit, even if it's not a perfect fit.
I thought Andrew Fettes actually reminded me a little bit of Gary Russell. And I could imagine the pair of those playing like a pair of comedy Autons or something. If you did a version of Auton that was just a little bit more fun, because these take themselves very seriously, really. They do have moments of comedy, but it's not a character comedy, I suppose, but it's not actually funny. They're just supposed to be charming, I guess. But actually, I can imagine Andrew Fettes and Gary Russell playing a pair of Autons who are not quite functioning to their full ability and having a great comic relationship with each other. It would be terrific.
Excellent. Right, we'll get that spin-off. The wheel's in motion.
Auton 4.
Oh, well, yeah, just what the world needs right now. So we must rate it. Is it a clanger, a banger, or an average meander?
Oh, see, compared with Spearhead from Space and Terror of the Autons, it's a clanger. because those are two top-rated Doctor Who stories. I mean, I know people don't think Terror of the Autons is as good, but by God, it's fun. And it's filled with, that Robert Holmes dialogue and characterization. But having said that, given what these are, given the sort of budgets and the resources that they have available, given that they are basically shoving a bunch of actors into roles just because they know who those actors are, and given what those actors do with those roles once they've got them, basically it's a banger then. So I think I have to come down to take an average of the two and say it's an average meander. I liked it, but I didn't enjoy it enough to want to go back to it probably for another 10 years or something, I guess. It's not, yeah. But I will say, I think it very much overachieves on the resources it has.
Yeah, I think probably within the context of what it is, it's a banger. But
yeah.
If you are taking it in the pantheon of Doctor Who, it very much lands on that average meander there.
See, and I'm not the guy who wrote Downtime, The Lost Years of Doctor Who, so I kind of have to judge things in a sort of more overall sense, or at least that's how I always try and give people the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, I have to try and be realistic as well. I think that's how my head works.
Brilliant. Right, well, there we go. An average meander for both of us.
Too hot for TV.
So, Auton 2, Sentinel, was directed and written by Nick Briggs, produced by Bill Baggs, released in January of 1998, just 1 year later. News at the time, Adrian Hill and Stubby K had just died, and a new range of short trips audios was announced, read by Nick Courtney and Sophie Aldred. And the releases at the time were the Bernie Summerfield book Tempest and the Eighth Doctor adventure Kursal, featuring the Eighth Doctor and Sam. And the past Doctor adventure didn't feature the Doctor at all. It was the Face of the Enemy with the Brigadier, the Master, Ian, Barbara, Yates, Benton, and Corporal Bell. Do you know what? I've never read any of those, so I've got nothing to say on them. And you were still out in the wilderness yourself, weren't you, JR?
I do have complete library of all the books that came out, or no, the Virgin New Adventures and Past Missing Adventures, and the BBC Eighth Doctor and Past Doctor Adventures. I do have a complete library of all those now, though.
But they just sit on the shelf, right?
Yeah, on a shelf I don't even have access to. I've got so many bookshelves crammed into this tiny little room. They're all squashed up against each other. So even if I wanted to read one of these books, it would be so hard to get at it now. I'd have to buy a new copy.
Or get the digital download, which may or may not be illegally or legally floating around the internet.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Well, quite.
I mean, I've paid for all the books, so I don't feel that guilty about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. And it's not like you can go out and buy them from W.H. Smith.
No, exactly.
Too hot for TV.
2 years after the warehouse incident, a lorry transporting Autons from the warehouse to another unit facility is hijacked by its own cargo. Meanwhile, Lockwood is troubled by extremely active dreams. Unit learns that the transfer of the Autons was authorised by Lockwood. When he later remembers signing the transportation docket, it becomes evident that the Nestine consciousness is using Lockwood's psychic abilities to their own ends. Unit's internal security division launches an investigation on Lockwood, pairing him with another psychic operative named Natasha Alexander. While Lockwood's abilities are owed to an alien implant, Natasha claims to have been psychic since birth. The escaped Autons are traced to Sentinel Island. There, the Auton Winslet has installed himself as the local vicar. He has brainwashed most of the island's inhabitants, and the Autons have killed those who resisted. They are using the combined mental energy of the church's congregation to awaken a Nestine creature buried beneath it. There are dormant Nestines lying underground around the world. They were put in place before the development of the human race. Their locations have become known to humanity as holy sites, and they are connected by ley lines. When Lockwood and Natasha arrive at the church, they succeed in reviving the Nestine. The Nestine attempts to awaken the others. Lockwood tries to defeat it, but instead absorbs the creature into his own mind.
Too hot for TV.
So is Auton 2 what you would expect them to do with a sequel to Auton? And actually, did it need a sequel?
I think it does, because I think it's too contained. So going back to what I said before, I don't think it pushes the story anywhere. And
Right.
it's literally just something wakes up, they run around inside a factory for a bit and put it back to sleep. So I think it needs to move on. I think they need to do something where they can move it on. And I don't know, but it seems to me they've clearly got a lot more money for this second one. I don't know if that's actually the case or whether they're just managing it better.
I think it's the same amount of money, actually, but as
Really?
you say, managed better. And, they're out on location, but I think it's somewhere I think Nick Briggs' parents lived in that village or something like that. And they just got everybody on side. And then they found a fan who was a budding CG artist. So all of a sudden the production values look a lot bigger than they actually are.
Oh, so they get to do the big monster with a vagina face at the end.
They do. And what else would the face of the Autons be?
Well, exactly. So the first one is, okay, let's do a Doctor Who story from the 1970s. What should we do? Underground facility. The second one is, let's do another Doctor Who story from the 1970s. What one shall we do? The Demons. so a bit, but while the first one, I don't think pushes that idea on anywhere, I think the interesting thing that the second one does that makes it a much better film, I think, in my opinion. Although, again, this comes with all the same caveats as the first one had, apart from Rhys Shearsmith. But the second one says, right, let's do the demons with a little bit of the sea devils because, there's a bit of mix and match going on. So there's some stuff on a beach. Actually, there's a bit where the Autons just walk into the water. And you think, what the hell are the Autons doing? And you never get to see them come out at the other end on an island. So it wasn't until half an hour later, I suddenly thought, oh, right, they're on an island. That's why they went into the water, right? So you've got some weird stuff that I think if you'd had, more producers, another script editor, whatever, somebody might have said, right, can we get an explanation for this? But the premise of this one is basically the Autons are on an island. Lead Auton, the human Auton, is taking over a church. They want to use mind control on all the people on the village on this island in order to sort of take over the island. I mean, it's not really massively logical that that's what they do. But if you take that as a premise, the interesting thing this does with that is, so this was the late 90s, and actually it's quite prescient because a lot of these films didn't come out until the 2000s, I don't think. But there was a thing at the time about, especially post-Iraq, about people coming down from mind control. And so because there was this sort of post-PTSD thing, but also in amongst that, there was this element of people are going away to war zones and being brainwashed. And so then people were thinking back to the 60s and Charles Manson and the cults and stuff like that. And so at the turn of the century, also because it was the turn of the century, you had this big thing about, will the cults rise again? Will people be brainwashed? And so you had this thing about sort of cult leaders in sort of small scale contained religious communities, sort of basically brainwashing people. Not something that Doctor Who really did in the 1970s. There's elements of it in things like Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And of course, there's elements of it in the Demons as well with the Master. But it's not quite. It pushes it on a bit. And actually, I think this does a really nice job, albeit cheaply and with all the sort of problems that we talked about with the first one. But it does a nice job of saying, okay, instead of what would a 1970s Doctor Who story have looked like in 1970, they say, okay, what would a 1970s Doctor Who story look like in the 1990s? And actually, this one does feel like it's moved on a little bit. Not a huge amount. For the Doctor Who fans, they're still getting the demons with a bit of the Sea Devils thrown in and,
Yeah.
But it does feel like it's pushed on a bit into the 1990s. It feels a little bit more modern.
It does feel a bit more modern. And I guess there's this sort of, it stretches for me sort of the credibility of trying to tie in the Nestine consciousness to ley lines and folk horror and stuff like that. It's sort of smashing against these elements, as you say, of classic Doctor Who. But it feels like a modern version of that, as you say. But there's something, I think, conceptually that doesn't quite nail it for me. But I do think this moves the characters on. the threat on in an interesting way. So has Briggs developed as a writer and a director, would you say?
Definitely. In the latter case, definitely. And in the former case, probably. It's hard to reconcile the fact that they're still working with a bunch of actors who've kind of been given roles that they're probably not best suited for. So I forget his name. The one who plays the lad in The Village.
Darren Warren Howard.
That's it. He's clearly capable like all the others, but he's clearly also not in the right role, really. So I don't think his performance is the strongest, but you can tell that he's not an incapable actor. But his character, for example, that's something you didn't get in the first one. Somebody who feels like they're at least supposed to be a rounded human being. Don't quite pull it off, but they get a lot closer than they did the first time around.
Yeah, he's got a girlfriend, Charlotte, played by Patricia Merrick. She's not fallen under the control of the Nestine, so she's very much the sort of rebel of the village. And what you would do now is she would be the human in, but instead we meet him, and then she's hiding in a shed somewhere, and he convinces her that everything's going to be okay. But actually, she should be our way into the story, I think.
Absolutely, because the problem with this is it starts with the characters you already know, and then they go to the characters who are new and the situation that's new. And actually, I think that diminishes the situation that's new. And it feels like everything's not quite sketched in enough. Whereas I think you want to start with the community, with somebody who's getting paranoid about all these things that are happening in the community around them, that they can't quite put their finger on why these things are happening and what it is that's happening. And their sort of paranoia unravels. That would have been a more interesting way to tell this story. Because this relationship, these two characters, it suffers from that thing that you get with sort of lower end stuff sometimes, in that, and I'm watching the sort of last version of Day of the Triffids, and that does this too. People are telling each other things, but they're not having conversations. They're saying just enough that the person watching can understand what's going on in the story and get to the next bit, and everything keeps moving forwards, but it never feels like human beings talking to each other, because people don't just tell each other the direct thing. They talk about the thing, they explain about the thing, they talk about how they feel about the thing. You never get a lot of that. So a lot of this feels sketched in very gently, and there's not quite enough of it to convince you that these are real people in a real place.
Absolutely. And also, I don't think sci-fi drama of this level at that time was doing things like that. We're yet to get to the point of, I suppose it's the Buffy thing, isn't it? When does Buffy start?
That was mid-90s, wasn't it? So it'd been around, I think, or it must have been around the time. I think it's like 96, 97, isn't it, Buffy? 97, yeah.
Yeah, and first aired in the UK in December of 98. So Buffy hasn't reached the UK yet. So let's give Nick Briggs the benefit of the doubt there, shall we? That he's not thought we can do characters properly in sci-fi, because no one's properly done it yet.
But also, and it's kind of a problem that you only really see with hindsight, is it wants to be Doctor Who, right? So it wants Michael Wade, Lockwood, to be its avatar for the Doctor. And Doctor Who, I think, works best when the Doctor arrives at a situation and you get to see what the situation is through his eyes, or through the companion's eyes, through their eyes. So you get introduced to the situation through them. I think the problem with these is, especially with this middle one, is you don't really, because Lockwood is not as rounded a character as the Doctor, and because actually his companion, Sally Arnold, she gets basically sidelined in the second and third ones. She's not a bigger character in those. You get somebody else instead, who again is a slightly weird character, who I guess we'll come to. This wants to introduce you to the situation through the eyes of its Doctor avatar, but it doesn't quite work. And I think it would be better if it just stepped back and said, right, we're not Doctor Who, let's try and do something in a slightly different way. But I don't think it's quite got the imagination to do that. So for wartime, you see it through Benton's eyes, right? It's a story about Benton, seen through the Benton's eyes. It doesn't need to throw in a Doctor avatar to sort of be a sort of critical observer on what Benton's up to. This could have done away with that.
Yeah. And I think had this initially been the Brigadier and his daughter, Kate, the pre-new series version, I think she would have been that in, and the Brigadier, obviously, it becomes the sort of, not the Doctor character, but becomes the recognisable element, so you don't need a Doctor avatar.
Yeah. Because then you get Jo Castleton comes in as Natasha, and I guess we'll talk about her and the character, but I think the trouble is, once you introduce her as well, every story needs to have a main character. That doesn't need to be the protagonist, but it needs to be the character whose journey you follow as the audience member, the sort of emotional hub of that story. And I think in the first one, it tries to make Sally Arnold that character because we see Lockwood through her. But because she gets sidelined in the second one, and because Lockwood is the character that we're observing rather than observing through, then you get Natasha Alexander thrown in, and all of a sudden it's like, well, who is the identification character? And there does need to be, people say you can do it without, but I think there does need to be somebody who's slightly the focus over the others. And so it does feel a bit unfocused, this.
Well, it was supposed to be Sally Arnold, but she gets a job in the West End, so that's why she only appears on the end of a phone call throughout.
Oh, really? Right.
So then Jo Castleton's Natasha Alexander is basically her replacement, to be sort of her on the ground. But within that, they're trying to develop a new character and give that new character an arc. So I think it definitely suffers for that. The script was also turned around fairly quickly. In fact, it wasn't a given that Nick was going to come back, because Bill Baggs basically didn't want Nick Briggs to direct the first one, but eventually he sort of relented.
Why? Did he want to do it himself or something?
Yeah, he wanted to do it himself. So the first film started off life as a real-time production, but then Keith Barnfather couldn't afford to make it, so they took it to Bill, and there was this whole big thing about Bill wanted to direct, but he let Nick do it, and then they finished making it, and Bill commissions another writer called Tim Saywood to write a script for Auton 2, and Bill's going to direct it, and then eventually Bill's like, actually, Nick, I want you to direct it, and Nick goes, well, I'm only going to direct it if I can write it. So again, it's sort of thrown together quite quickly, despite having a year's lead time.
Yeah, I think he basically does a good job again, though. I think it's an improvement on the first one. Yeah,
and I think obviously you've got these more expansive locations, and it's just a village and the countryside.
Yeah.
But you get a night shoot at the beginning. You get the Autons walking on the beach, looks great, and sort of walking into the water a bit. We only get to see them go up to about just below the knee, but it kind of sells it. The stuff in the church, I think, looks really good.
The stuff in the woods looks great.
When they're walking through the fields, the Autons walking through the fields.
Yeah.
That's probably as close to like an iconic shot that these sort of spin-offs get. If it was done in 1970s Doctor Who, that picture would be on the front cover of a Radio Times, but obviously we're a bit beyond that at this point.
For sure. Yeah, and again, the stuff in the woods, the sort of the action stuff, the sort of fight sequences.
Yeah.
I think he does a pretty good job of those mostly. I don't think it's quite as controlled as it is in the factory for the first one. But I think because it's in the woods and because it's got that much more breadth and depth and a bit more space to work with, I think it comes across even better.
Yeah. If there's things that don't work visually, it's the Lockwood's unit office at the beginning, which looks like it's an office in somebody's house rather than a top secret military organisation. And I think generally, though, it's quite restrained and he doesn't reach for anything too big. But obviously, the big addition is that they've got somebody on CGI. We get the rays out of the guns, the rays out of the Auton hands, things like that. But obviously, the big thing is the monster at the end. Now, bearing in mind this film is approaching 30 years old, what do we think of the CGI?
Well, it's not great, is it? From a 24 perspective. But I remember thinking the first time I watched it, when I first watched it, I never thought, oh, wow, that's really impressive. But what I did think was, for the money, for the resources they've got available to them, oh, wow, that is really impressive. And I remember thinking the thing on top of the church, I think it's better in the second one, actually, than in the third one, because in the third one, when you've got it in an enclosed room, it becomes really obvious that it's like this sort of fairly cheap special effect. But on top of the church, I thought it looked pretty impressive.
Yeah. I remember it coming out at the time, and it was impressive. And if you compare it to other CGI, I mean, one that sticks out for me particularly is some of the CGI work done in the film Species.
Right.
Which, again, at the time, I probably thought was brilliant, but you look at it now and you're like, wow, that really looks like a computer game. So it wasn't so much of like, oh my God, this is like watching Star Wars, but it was like, oh, the technology now exists that low-budget filmmakers can make it.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, it pointed towards the fact that at some point over the next few years, the technology was, if not already, at a place where Doctor Who could come back and have decent computer-generated effects, which in 1993, 1994, it just couldn't.
Yeah. No, overall, that's all pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah. They pay attention to certain things, like when the creature bursts out of the church roof, and then it's dispatched. Like, the church roof is still destroyed.
Yeah.
It's thought about. It's not just an element placed on top of a static picture.
And some of the effects of the sort of the energy wave rolling out.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to do that and forget that it's a three-dimensional space and make it move like it's moving in a three-dimensional space. And although obviously it always just looks like something that's been imposed on the picture,
yeah,
it still moves in a properly three-dimensional way, and it interacts with the characters rather more than often would be the case with some of these things. So overall, I don't think it looks great, but I think it looks way better than they could have been forgiven for wanting to get away with.
Yeah, agreed. The next film is not directed by Nick Briggs, and we'll get to that in a moment. But would you like to have seen Nick Briggs direct more of this sort of thing or beyond?
Yes. I think the improvements he makes between the first and the second, and although they also come at a bit of a cost, I think I would have liked to have seen the entire trilogy be the work of one mind, because I think it would have fit together better.
Agreed.
Having said that, there is a thing that they do where in the second one, they look back at the first one and say, oh, we didn't explain that. And they come up with an explanation that fits in the universe of the stories they're telling. And in the third one, they do that again. So the whole thing, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the whole thing about Lockwood's brain and him being Unit's creature, they start talking about the microchip in the third one, which suddenly makes sense of something that's been unexplained in the first two. I don't know if Briggs would have come to that. Maybe he would, because maybe that's something that they took from Briggs. Maybe that's something that was in the scripts, but maybe didn't make it to the screen or whatever. But things like that, and there are 2 or 3 other things as well, I think, that the third one explains in a sort of retconning way that actually makes sense of things that happened before. The Auton's plan talked about actually the ley lines and stuff in the second one, and how does that really fit with the Nestene consciousness? I think the third one makes sense of that by having this plot about all these Nestene energy units buried all over the planet, and that the planet would be swarming with these Nestenes. That kind of makes sense of the ley lines thing. Not necessarily because it's ley lines, but because of maybe the ley lines. I mean, if these Nestene energy units have been buried there for thousands of years, you could have added 2 and 2 together and said, well, that's why the ley lines are where they are, because they run between the Nestene energy units. They're what connects the... So, I mean, the whole thing, they didn't quite fit it all together like a jigsaw puzzle, but I thought they got enough of the way there that it felt like so it felt for me like the trilogy felt like a coherent trilogy.
Yeah. I would like to have seen Nick Briggs do the third film. Obviously, I would have liked to have seen him do a bit more Doctor Who related stuff and possibly beyond. I think for the resources he has, he shows a real flair and makes these things feel very dynamic in a way that other people don't always do on these things. And he's a director that's not used to multicam, so he's shooting single camera, albeit in limited resources, and I think he does a great job. So it's a shame that his directorial skills after that are strictly audio.
Yeah. The third one, I don't think is like a massive step down or anything from the second one, but the second one definitely felt the second one of the three is the one that feels most cinematic.
Yeah, agreed.
The third one, it feels like the story wants to be as cinematic as the second one, but just doesn't quite make it there.
Well, let's get on to that very shortly. But before we do, is there anything else you want to say on Auton 2?
Well, we didn't really talk about Natasha Alexander, other than that she's added in. The actor, Joe Castleton, again, I think she's very good and very capable. And of all the characters across all the three films, I think she most feels like the one suited to her role.
Yeah, I agree. I think she is the best thing about the second two films. And she does have sort of, I don't want to say she's got sort of leading actor energy, but she's certainly got leading character energy.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, and you really feel like, okay, now things are coming together, and I could quite happily watch her do a whole bunch of other sort of Natasha Alexander Doctor Who related spin-offs.
It's a shame they don't tell that second film from her perspective, because that would have felt like there's two things that are a shame about it. One, that they don't tell it from her perspective, and two, that they make her a psychic as well, because I think that diminishes her character, because it just makes her feel like, oh, Lockwood knockoff.
Yeah,
in a way, and she's better than that, and the character could have been better than that. And so actually the problem with that is you've got your two main characters are both psychics. It's like, well, as an audience member, you're just like, well, it just feels like they've run away off into bizarro fantasy land a bit.
Yeah. Shall we rate it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I tell you what, just rewind, copy and paste, and stick in everything I said about the first one, really. Because again, I don't think Auton 2 stands up to televised Doctor Who, but I think it's way better than, and it's better than the first one, so it's way better than it could and probably should and probably would have been.
Yeah.
So again, I think overall, again, I have to sort of say it's an average meander. Well, no, can I characterise it as an above average meander?
Yes, you can.
Okay, that's how I'm going to characterise it then.
There we go. I will agree too, and it's the best one of the trilogy, and I've been wanting to cover it on this podcast for a long time. So thank you for nominating it.
Too hot for TV.
So Auton 3 was directed by Bill Baggs. It was written by Arthur Wallace, more on him in a bit, and Paul Ebbs, and released in November of 1999.
There's a co-director credit for Patricia Merrick.
Ah, yes. So she was more of an AD, but it's more of an affectation there.
Oh, okay.
News at the time, repeats commence. It is 99% definite that BBC Two's run of classic Doctor Who repeats is going to commence on 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 16th of November, with parts 1 and 2 of John Pertwee's debut adventure Spearhead from Space, although they would not be broadcasting The Ambassadors of Death, The Mind of Evil, The Planet of the Daleks, or Invasion of the Dinosaurs, because they've got black and white bits in them. That was a short-lived repeat series that did not do very well.
I remember so well, because the publicity was, we're going to repeat the whole of Doctor Who from Spearhead from Space onwards, and by the middle of Silurians, the viewer figures were so low, I don't think there was a single person left who thought they were just going to carry on and do the lot.
Yeah, I think it's this thing, I might have said this before on the podcast, but I think they have success with repeats of Star Trek and the Avengers and stuff like that, but they're self-contained 45-minute, 50-minute stories, which was the format that people were used to of television at the time. Starting off with a series that's got 3 7-part Doctor Who stories.
Yeah.
Plus, those things are shot on film, so they hold up a little bit better.
And on top of that as well, so people who like Star Trek and who like Thunderbirds and stuff like that aren't necessarily going to collect it. Everybody who wants to watch Spearhead from Space has already got it on DVD.
Yeah. And also you've got to think at that time people have got the VHS or the DVD.
Actually, the VHS, no, DVD was still to come, wasn't it? Yeah.
But if you like Thunderbirds or Star Trek, you buy a video and there's 2 episodes on it. So you've got to be a really committed fan to want to get them all. Whereas tuning in every Tuesday evening or something while you're having your beans on toast is it makes it more accessible.
And also, I think there's a case to be made that Thunderbirds and the Avengers, they're more disposable. So, I mean, as fun as they are, as great as they are, you can watch an episode and then not have to worry about catching it again. You can just enjoy an episode.
Yeah.
Whereas Doctor Who, even outside of the serialized format of it, the thing about Doctor Who is, because of the change of companions, all of the time, it always feels like it's an ongoing story. Whereas something like the Avengers or Thunderbirds, it's the same characters in every episode. I mean, basically, you do get changes in the Avengers, but basically it's the same characters in every episode. And so it never feels like it's part of a bigger story. It just feels like it's a story that you can just watch. You can watch one. You don't have to worry about whether you do catch next week.
Absolutely. The releases at the time, we had the Whispers of Terror from Big Finish featuring the Sixth Doctor and Perry. So since we've last had an Auton thing, we've got the Doctor Who range from Big Finish. We also had the release of the book A Critical History of Doctor Who on television. We had the Past Doctor Adventure Corpse Marker featuring the Fourth Doctor and Leela. Frontier Worlds featuring the Eighth Doctor, Fitz and Compassion. The Doctor's Effect by Steve Camden. And Planet of the Daleks and Revelation of the Daleks were released together on a VHS tin, and we had Doctor Who Night on BBC Two. So it was quite a busy time for Doctor Who.
Doctor Who Night, because that was what kicked off the repeat season, of course. Yeah. The tin, it's up there. You probably can't see it from where you are, but it's up there behind me. Yeah. And Corpse Marker, that's one that I have read.
Oh, well, there you go. I've done that quite recently on the podcast. It's not a very good book, but
I enjoyed it fine enough, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think any of those are really great fiction, really. Maybe Damaged Goods is the one that stands up against the others more.
As I mentioned, the key thing that's happened is Whispers of Terror, which is the second or third Big Finish release. So Doctor Who has come back on audio, and I think this starts to signal the beginning of the end for BBV, but also the beginning of the end for video spin-offs from BBV, because all of a sudden you've got real Doctor Who, and it's got the unlimited budget everybody likes to talk about of audio, which is sort of bollocks because, they've still only got 8 actors.
But I think, insofar as I think that these things should exist at all, because there's a part of me that thinks they probably shouldn't exist, but I also think that so I think the problem that you've got is these dramas want to be something for classic fans that classic fans aren't getting elsewhere. But when Big Finish turn up, even though it's only audio, you've actually got TV doctors playing the Doctor in person. And so they're doing 2 very different things, the audio dramas and the video dramas, but definitely the audio dramas are biting into the video drama space, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Too hot for TV.
Lockwood and Natasha have returned from Sentinel Island, coming on shore in the town of Millhampton. Computers around the world are failing. They are being invaded by the Nestine consciousness through Lockwood's implant. Meanwhile, the entire population of Millhampton has disappeared. They have been absorbed into the mind of another revived Nestine below the city. The only survivor is the real Winslet, who is still being used by the Nestines at the local psychiatric hospital. Lockwood and Natasha are both being used by another psychic unit operative named Palmer to lead them to the heart of the Nestine activity. Palmer monitors their movements through a constant link with Natasha's mind. Meanwhile, Natasha is used by the Nestines to lure Lockwood to the hospital, which the Autons are using as the centre of their operations. There, the Auton Winslet is trying to free the Nestine energy from Lockwood's mind so it can infect every computer in the world and revive all the dormant Nestine creatures. Lockwood resists by convincing himself that everything he sees is a dream. When Dr. Arnold arrives, his resolve is broken. He is then forced to sacrifice his own life to destroy the Nestine plan.
Too hot for TV.
So, this third film was originally written by Nick Briggs, but Nick and Bill fall out, and this was the end of their friendship, a 30-year friendship.
It's like Eric Sayward and John Nathan Turner all over again.
It's just like that. But basically, they were a week off shooting, and Bill wrote him a letter saying the script isn't working. We need to completely rewrite it. Here are all the problems. And Nick Briggs is like, we've been working on this for 2 years. Why are you bringing up all these problems now? We're a week away from shooting.
Was Briggs going to direct at that point as well then?
Yes, he was, yeah. So Briggs walks away, and Arthur Wallace is basically a pen name for him, but then Paul Ebbs comes in and does a significant rewrite and writes additional material to Bill's guidance, essentially. And I think a lot of people who work with Bill say that potentially he isn't the strongest on story.
Yeah.
Like he's got a real good producer ethic in that he can get things done cheaply, but his idea of how story works comes up often with his former collaborators as him not quite having the head for it.
There are a shed load of problems with this.
Very true. So how does it compare to the previous two?
I sort of want to say relatively favourably, in that I think minute by minute, I think it basically does reasonably well what the other two have done reasonably well minute by minute. But I think it's when you step back and take a sort of more overview of it that the story is just non-existent almost. And it's so I think this finishes off some of the things from the other two quite nicely. So I'm wondering then, the Arthur Wallace thing, I'm wondering how much of Briggs's ideas actually are in this. Going back to what I said about the explanation for the chip in Lockwood's head, but also other things like the Nestines being buried all over the world. And this actually, because the middle one definitely feels then like, oh, we're continuing the story. Let's move it on, but not finish it. And then we can finish it in a third one. And there's definitely a sense at which this is the end of a story then that's been going across all three. And I think the sort of way the story ends is pretty satisfying. The idea that there's been all these nesting consciousness units buried in the earth all over the world for millennia or whatever, I think that's a great idea. And I think that's a great place for this story to go to at the end. But it's just the actual plot of how the story unfolds in this third one that's just absolutely shoddy as hell.
There's something about this, and I remember seeing it at the time at a Doctor Who convention, and the general feeling being this was a bit of a step down from the first two. And maybe some of that is the impact of Big Finish, as I said, but certainly the script feels a bit clunky. It's suddenly a lot of people having conversations in rooms. I know there's the action there, but like the climax is in this badly lit hospital room.
Yeah.
And just the staging of it all feels a little off, and there's no music, and you're like, oh, this is the big climax to your trilogy, because this feels like a rehearsal in a church hall down the road.
Yeah. I mean, one thing it does do again is, like the first two, it says, right, what Doctor Who story are we doing this time? And actually, it says, what third Doctor Who story are we doing this time? Because they're all third Doctor Who stories, really. And it says, let's do Invasion of the Dinosaurs, where you've got the deserted London. And I think it does that pretty well. There was
deserted Southampton.
Yeah, sorry, not London. I think it does that pretty well. There's more of that than I expected to be and remembered there being. So there was quite a few minutes of that. And I thought they did that in a way that felt, I mean, I kept looking at it and thinking, well, how did they do this? Because, I mean, clearly there's a lot of early morning shooting, but there was a lot of early morning shooting. So it must have been a few mornings. But then, oh God, do you want to say something about that before we...
I was just going to say they started at about 4 or 5 a.m. on quite a lot of the shoot days. So their shoot days went from, say, 4 till 5 p.m. or something like that. And they just got little bits of it sort of incrementally, which is the only thing you can do if you can't afford to shut down a city centre.
Well, no.
It all feels very early morning.
Oh, it does, but I think it really works.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then the other Doctor Who story that this one says, right, we'll do is, and this is, on the one hand, it's a brilliant choice because it's like, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the hospital, the cottage hospital where Spearhead from Space starts. This one goes back to a hospital that feels a bit like a cottage hospital too, frankly. Brilliant idea, but also on the other hand, completely sinks the story because it ends up the climax of your trilogy is 40 minutes in a room.
Yeah. And this actually has a bigger budget than the other two Autons because Who North America, who bought the US broadcasting rights for it.
Oh, really? Put some money in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, put a bit of money in, which sort of, I mean, it feels bigger, but I don't think it feels as polished as the second one.
There's more sort of going on. There's a car journey. It becomes a road movie for part of it. But it's two characters who just don't really have anything to say to each other, bumping into a third character who they don't really have anything to say with. Yeah. You've got Andrew Fetz running around, Sergeant Ramsey running around, like throwing himself around as if he's like soldiers all over the place that he's trying to avoid. There's no sign of anybody anywhere. It just starts to look silly, like a school play that they're doing on the school field instead of in the school hall.
Yeah, the action, I think, really is the bit of the direction that suffers. Like, as you say, there's that moment where it is Andrew Fetz, isn't it? He runs around the corner and bumps into an Auton.
Oh, God, yeah.
Look more stagey and shit, which is a shame because it's just come from this CGI shot of like 20 Autons appearing, even though we all know they've only got 3 costumes.
Yeah.
It just feels a little lackluster in places compared to the other two. And again, there's limited resources and stuff, but I feel like the first one had a creative at the heart of it who was really making the most of it, whereas this is somebody just trying to get it done.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that is the difference. It feels like on the two Briggs ones that although his idea is relatively limited, he's trying to push that idea as far as he can in terms of how professional he can make it look. So even though, as I said, with that sort of objective overview, these are not sort of broadcastable on mainstream telly, but actually, if you just kind of look on the surface of them, they don't look that far off. They don't feel that far off. This third one is I tell you what it looks like. This third one is when you watch the whole of Doctor Who in order, and you've got all these stories where every time they go outdoors, they're suddenly on film cameras. Yes, there's a jar between the indoor stuff and the outdoor stuff, but it looks like they've spent more money on it. And then when you get to the Sylvester McCoy era and it's all on OB cameras on video, all of a sudden it looks really cheap and nasty. And it looks like a really expensive home video that the BBC just happened to have made.
Yeah.
This is the sort of Sylvester McCoy production values of the Auton trilogy.
I think that's being unkind to the Sylvester McCoy.
No, I mean, the Sylvester McCoy era is brilliant, but the choice to use OB video cameras to save money is a problem.
There's a weird orange hue to the whole thing, and I can't decide whether that's something they've done in the grade, whether the fact it just isn't really lit as well as the other two, or whether it's a weird stylistic choice, but I was really struck by sort of how murky yellow / orange the whole thing is.
I think, I'm assuming it's a choice. I think it's to try and make it look, because also, you've got to remember, this was just after 7 came out.
Right.
And so this is the same year as Fight Club comes out. And I think 7 is one of those seminal moments in cinema where the look and feel of what cinema is and can be changes. And I think, although, it takes a few years for these things to completely bed in, I think cinema looks different after 7 than it did before. And I think they're just looking at Auton 3 and saying, not necessarily how can we make it look more like 7, but how can we make it look more like a film? And so I think they've understood that grading something can make it look more like a film. But I mean, it's not just grading it to be slightly more orange. There are lots of other things you have to go through.
Very true. And there's more reliance on CGI for this one. How do we feel about the use? Because it feels like on the last one, they've gone, we can have some cool ray guns and then we'll do a big monster at the end. This time, there is CGI, it feels like, in nearly every other shot.
I didn't mind it, funnily enough, because I think after the first 2, mainly the second one, I'd kind of come to, I've sort of acclimatized to it. And so I watched them in pretty close succession, 3 successive nights, basically. So I'm like, I was prepared for it mentally, I think. So I was like, it's okay. And actually, again, like in the second one where I said they were taking into account the fact that it's a 3-dimensional space, even if on film it becomes a 2-dimensional space, if you know what I mean. I think that's basically true of this as well. The bits in outer space where you've got the satellites, clearly it doesn't look real, but I think they've framed those bits well enough. I'm assuming that's because those bits were put together by somebody other than Bags.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think Bags went, this is what we need. Can you do it? And that person's gone away. And I'm hoping, and I think that this person went on to have quite a big career in CGI,
Right.
but he was just willing to he was a Doctor Who fan who was just willing to do CGI and learn his trade.
Right.
If I remember correctly, he's someone that made like a little sort of 5-minute Doctor Who CGI film with Daleks that got shown at conventions, and then Bill Baggs went, we'll use you. So he's learning. He wants to do the best job possible because this is his show reel.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of it, and it could become a problem, but I don't think it does, because I think it's basically as good as the stuff in the second one. He's probably got slightly less to work with, because in this one, a lot of it is sort of not ray guns, but it's essentially the same sort of thing where there's rays passing from people to people and stuff.
I must say the unit ray guns always made me laugh at the time, because my little brother had a super soaker gun and it was just one of those sprayed silver. Exactly the same thing. But, Doctor Who did that all the time.
Yeah, you could tell, but I mean, I think they got away with it.
Just about. You said it wasn't much of a satisfying conclusion.
I tell you what the problem with the plot is, from my perspective, what the problem with the plot is. You bring in, so it's Graham Dufresne, isn't it? As Ross Palmer is the new lead in this one. He is, if I remember rightly, he's in the first one in a really minor role, or am I misremembering?
You're misremembering.
Am I?
He's
okay.
Not been in the other.
I had it in my head that he had a tiny part in the first one where he was Lockwood's boss, and then he comes back as Lockwood's boss as the main character. He's really good as an actor. He's a terrific actor. Again, he's probably slightly miscast, but I think he's actually not as miscast as a lot of the others. I think he's pretty good, really. But I think his character is given stuff to do that his character wouldn't have to do. But because it's like the thing that you can't understand about this is you've got Lockwood, who is the character who should be doing all the stuff that Palmer's doing in this one. And so you've locked Lockwood in a room and you're getting Palmer to do all this stuff instead. And he becomes yet another psychic character in the story who's channeling the Nestines through his brain. It just becomes so messy. I mean, your lead character is locked in a room for the entire running time. There's
just no need for the addition of that.
Yeah.
This new character as well. It's like Briggs, or maybe it was Ebbs, I don't know. We're like, oh, fuck, we've put Lockwood in a room for the whole time. We need to have him there. So we need to create a pseudo Lockwood.
You've already got one. You've already got Natasha Alexander. She's already a pseudo Lockwood. Why do you need to put another pseudo Lockwood on top of that as well?
Yeah. Do you think any of the characters have a sort of satisfying, like the characters we've seen before, have a satisfying conclusion to their story? Do you think that those bits work?
No. I mean...
No, because by the end of it, they just use a digital watch to solve everything, right?
Yeah, and yeah. Oh, dear, no. I mean, there are people getting killed off now, left, right and centre. Because I think so I'm assuming the psychology of the people making it is you followed these characters' trajectories. We need to show that there's stuff going on that's heavy in the final end of this story has to have consequences. So let's kill a few of these characters off. So Joe Castleton gets killed off screen.
Yeah.
And the reaction, I mean, I think he does reasonably well with the reaction, but it's so throwaway because you need to get on with the next thing. It's like, what? Yeah. What happened there? Is this character that he's supposed to care about? And he just kind of flinches briefly and carries on.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing with you're right, with the digital watch, the sort of electronic watch thing, whatever it is, it's just shocking. And to stick Lockwood in a room for the whole running time is just appalling. Why are you doing that with your main character?
And I really get the feeling here that the hospital they're in is an abandoned hospital. Like, there isn't, like, obviously in the first one, they're in a warehouse and they go, do you know what? We need to make this feel like a warehouse. Okay, we can't quite do it, but we've got all these boxes, we're going to try and make this work. With that, I just feel like they've gone, we've got an abandoned hospital. That'll do. It looks enough like a hospital, but there's no sense that pre the Auton invasion, it had any kind of life to it.
No, because they're in a room with a bed and a lamp, right?
Yeah, and it feels like that lamp is lighting the entire scene.
Yeah, none of it really works. Bill Baggs might have a reputation for being able to get stuff done on the cheap, but actually his reputation should be for getting things completed on the cheap, because I'm not sure he's actually getting anything done.
You get that point where Winslet's in the hospital and the Auton shows up and he's going, no, and you kind of go, I can see that in his mind, this is that bit in Terminator 2 where Arnie walks out the lift and Linda Hamilton's against the wall, but it just looks like a very, very low-budget Amtram version of it.
Yeah, you're right, actually. That's the other influence here, Terminator 2, isn't it? It sort of comes in.
Yeah.
And then there's a terrible, terrible, terrible bit where Palmer has to throw Natasha against the wall before the two of them carry on and complete the scene, and it just doesn't work at all. And you just think, couldn't you've just rolled back and done another take of that?
Yeah, and there's a boom comes into shot a couple of times as well.
Oh yes, I noticed that. I was like, what is going on here? You never had any of that in the first two.
Yeah, and it just, like, we get the Autons running a lot, and some of them have a bit of a mince to them when they run.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden...
And his main Auton is the one with the chubby bum.
Yeah. You suddenly, like, I thought these are supposed to be, mounds of plastic, but all of a sudden they just look like guys. I mean, they're not the greatest version of the spearhead thing anyway, but when you're sort of pushing believability and then you go like, oh, I'll get the chubby guy and the guy with the mincy run to be the lead Autons, it goes, those aren't Autons, those are guys in masks.
Yeah, and then there's another bit where one of the Autons is left-handed. Did you notice that? Two of the Autons are right-handed, the other one's left-handed, and it just, why would you have a left-handed Auton?
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, and that's fine. Do you know what? It's made cheaply. It should be fine. But the person who's in control of it should be able to say, look, I know you're left-handed, but Autons wouldn't be. So just use your right hand just for this thing where you raise it. Because the thing is, things like that do take you out of it. They shouldn't do. You should be able to forgive them. And kind of you do forgive them. But nevertheless, you're sort of proactively having to forgive things that if they'd just thought about it a little more, wouldn't have took you out of it in the first place.
Absolutely. And this sort of signals the beginning of the decline of Bill Baggs from somebody who's an aspiring director trying to make something good to, I've got an audience, I'm just going to try and make things as cheaply as possible and sell them for as high amount as possible.
Right. No, my biggest complaint, before we move on, is that on the DVD of this, you've got Guests for the Night by Nigel Fairs, which after your review the other week on Too Hot for TV, I'm definitely not going to listen to. But the sad thing was that nowhere on the cover of the DVD does it have the cover of the audio, which I was looking forward to after your review of, Sophie Aldred in somebody's bed.
Well, I mean, I can send you those if you really need to. Is there any more life in these characters by the end of it? Like,
most of them are dead. What are you talking about?
True. But it just strikes me as it's kind of a dour end to the trilogy in a way. And not just, I mean, I'm talking script-wise and in terms of production values. But I sort of leave it going, oh, is that it?
You get to the end and all of a sudden they're talking about Nestines buried all over the earth. And you're thinking Nigel Neal, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, where does Nigel Neal take that? He finishes in this great big cathedral where the creature manifests. But they did that in Auton too.
Yeah.
So
we're in a pump room and a hospital room. That's it,
yeah, and some guy presses a button twice on his watch and sends a heart attack through the nesting consciousness or something.
Yeah.
And it's
dreadful.
But it disappears. But also, I think it does leave the door open for a fourth one because the creature just falls down a hole, right?
Yeah, very true.
So
it goes grey and falls down a hole.
Yeah, so you could have a sort of a fourth one, which wouldn't be the fourth part of the story, but would be like an epilogue to the story.
Yeah.
A bit like the Fourth Omen film.
Yeah, I could see that.
In that, it's the child of the main character from the first three films, so it becomes like an epilogue. In this, you could basically sort of do something where a residual creature or something still has life and somebody's trying to bring it back to life or something. The way of doing it fairly low budget is I've got a monster in my basement sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's there to do. It's there. It's a possibility, but I mean, it just doesn't leave anything in a happy place, really, does it?
No. And there wasn't, like, the reviews for the third film were generally negative, and I just don't think there was any appetite for another Auton film within fandom. And it had just sort of run its course, and people, as we said, were getting excited about Sylvester McCoy, Peter Davison and Colin Baker doing Doctor Who over at Big Finish.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say on Auton 3?
I still enjoyed it sort of about the same as I enjoyed the first two, give or take. I think the second one is the best one, and this third one is probably the worst of the three. But I do generally overall think they were more or less of a level. So, I mean, we've been complaining about this third one, but I think that's only relative to like the second one, really.
Yeah. So then we must rate it. Is it a clanger, a banger, or an average meander?
Well, I'm basically just going to repeat what I said about the others. The first one was an average meander. The second one was an above average meander. And this one's a below average meander. But they're all in this. They are all in the same ballpark, I think.
I'm calling this one a clanger.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's a decent enough, regardless of where it sits in the pantheon of Doctor Who or broadcastable television. I don't think it's a good enough ending to a trilogy that had a lot of promise.
That is fair enough. And the things that I enjoyed this were seeing them in a car on the road and thinking that's something you don't generally get to see in these sort of cheap knockoff dramas. And getting to see them run around the town. And then when they arrive at the hospital, there's a certain amount of running around there before they get into I just thought that despite the fact that it didn't feel expensive, it did feel like there was a lot of work going on and a lot of things that you don't normally get to see. So I think I just enjoyed seeing all of those things.
Too hot for TV.
How do you feel after watching all three of the Auton films in quick succession? Like, does it make you hungry for more Doctor Who spin-offs, or are you just like, oh, I don't know whether I can do any more of this?
Yeah, it makes me think that because Doctor Who spin-offs kind of exist at a certain level, don't they? A certain level of professionalism that they don't ever seem to be able to get beyond. And so Keith Barnfather, again, is a lovely fella, and I think he does what he does really well. But what I would like to see is a Doctor Who spin-off, sort of a licensed but non-BBC Doctor Who spin-off with proper resources and with proper time for the actors to get to know their characters and with, expensive enough cameras and, expensive enough editing that they could... Because... the thing about these three is, and I've said it every time we've sort of rated them, haven't I? Objectively, they're not very good, but subjectively, they do way better than they really should have done. I would just like to see one Doctor Who licensed spin-off where the resources actually are there to make something that feels just a bit more ambitious, a bit more imaginative.
The nearest they got to it was the K9 series, which has many problems, but, it was a kid's series. And I did a couple of episodes for it on this, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, even if it wasn't the greatest production.
Right.
And I think, as I mentioned about the right situation, I just don't know whether we'll ever see a world like that, unless you get sort of an 80s. I mean, the 80s writers are the only ones whose rights are really still out there. And you've got to wonder what the audience is for something like that.
Because, of course, the other problem is all of these characters have been done and done and done and done. That if you did have the money to do it, you wouldn't want to repeat anything you've already done because the fans have already seen it. But that means that you've already burned through any good ideas that you might have had. So even if you were to make something that looked a bit better and had better production values, you'd probably just tell the shit story with it.
Very true. Well, look, JR, thanks for coming here and talking all things Auton trilogy with me. If people want to find you on the internet, where can they find you?
On the internet.
Excellent. Google JR Southall.
And Strangers in Space podcast, I guess.
Excellent.
But they'll find you anyway, so...
I mean, the chances are that everybody who listens to this listens to Strangers in Space.
All 23.
All 23 of them. Next time, I'll be joined by Johan Morris, and we'll be looking at the documentaries Who's Doctor Who, 30 Years in the TARDIS, and the Doctor Who Confidential episode, Do You Remember the First Time? Until next time, I've been Dylan.
I've been JR.
And this has been Doctor Who, Too Hot for TV.
Too hot for TV.
So just bear in mind that when I do the edit, I always drop in a synopsis before we have the discussion of what happens. So we do spoilers, and you don't need to, in theory, go, oh, well, the listener won't know. I mean, they may not, but, basically, assume everybody knows what we're talking.
I've been listening, Dylan, since we last spoke, because I thought, well, I ought to. So I pulled out a bunch of episodes, either with people on that I liked or stuff that I vaguely knew about. And I mean, last time we recorded, I had heard a few episodes, but just not for a while. So now I've been regularly listening.
You're well versed. Well, your first episode's due out in about 3 weeks, actually. It's the next one on the edit
I've been waiting for fucking ages for this.
That's because I record them in blocks. I say blocks. It's just when I've got a bit of spare time. So
you're used to working in TV where you record stuff and then it comes out months later.
Yeah,
I'm used to recording in podcasts where you record stuff and it comes out hours later.
Very true. But then it's not like I do anything that's remotely relevant. It's like everything's 20 years old most of the time. So